Welcome to day 38 on the trail. We have 5 readings for today from Luke 21 verses 5 through 38, Exodus 9, 13 through 10:20, Job 12 verses 1 through 25, the 48th Psalm, and Sirach chapter 42 verses 8 through 25. In Exodus today, we begin with the third triad of plagues. As we discussed earlier, the third triad is partially defined by Moses stretching out his hand to initiate each plague. This is an indication that these plagues are to be grouped together. Now, in the 7th plague, Moses himself is the one who is initiating the plague. This demonstrates an increasing severity of the plagues of Egypt. However, God does warn Pharaoh and the Egyptians about the coming hail and fire falling from heaven, which gives them an opportunity to save themselves and their livestock. Some of the Egyptians heed the warning. Others, ignoring the power of the previous plagues, did not. Also, as an act of mercy, only the flax and barley are destroyed by the hail. The wheat and the spelt were not affected since they were late in sprouting. It is important to remember that Egypt was the breadbasket of the ancient Near East. So this plague not only hurt the people and the feed that they had for their livestock, but also affected the overall economy of Egypt and the surrounding regions. In the 8th plague, locusts devour everything that was not destroyed by the hail, further devastating the Egyptian economy. Also, in the 8th plague, we have a major shift. Previously, we are told that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. Now, in the 8th plague, it is God who hardens Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh, of his own free will, hardened his heart 7 times in the 7 previous plagues. So notice the use of the number 7 here. The number 7 represents completeness or wholeness. So God provided Pharaoh every opportunity to change his mind, repent, and to let God's people go. But once the 7th opportunity had passed, the time had come for God to use Pharaoh's own stubbornness to complete the rescue of his people. So let's turn to Luke chapter 21, where we find our first real introduction to what is called apocalyptic literature or apocalyptic imagery. Let me be clear here. What we are talking about is a classification of a type of literature. Apocalyptic literature in the Bible is a style of writing, like poetry or storytelling are types of literature. When we refer to apocalyptic literature, this is not necessarily about predicting the future. It is a type of literature that was fairly common in the ancient world. We see this type of literature used in Ezekiel, parts of Daniel, and of course in Revelation. We also find this style of writing or imagery used in the Gospels. For example, we see it in our reading today from Luke. In Luke 21 and the parallel passage in Matthew 24, the disciples are pointing out the buildings adorning the Temple Mount. Jesus responds by telling them that despite the grandeur and magnificence of the temple, everything they see will be destroyed. Not one stone will be left on top of another. Now, for the disciples of Jesus who were listening to him that day, and perhaps Luke's readers as well, a cataclysmic event that would bring about the destruction of the temple and the fall of Jerusalem must certainly herald the end of the age, or even the end of the world. And their assumptions are not unfounded. Large portions of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel reflect on the destruction of the first temple in similar apocalyptic terms and images. Therefore, Jesus uses similar apocalyptic imagery in his description of the events that the disciples will encounter when the second temple, the one they were looking at, is destroyed by the Romans under Titus in AD 70. Rome's destruction of Jerusalem caused tremendous suffering for the Jewish people. Truly, one stone was not left upon another. According to Josephus, approximately 1.1 million people died in Jerusalem during the Roman siege. The city was razed, and later rebuilt as a Roman city, and renamed Aelia Capitolina by Emperor Hadrian. Now, while this was doubtlessly an end of the age type event, Jesus also seems to blend these events in the first century with references to his eventual return, which would also be an end of the age event. This is a characteristic that we often see in the use of apocalyptic imagery. The initial events that Jesus is referring to in Luke 21 and Matthew 24 happened in AD 70. However, similar end of the age event will also happen again. Therefore, these apocalyptic stories and images have the ability to speak directly to every generation that is undergoing suffering. And the call that we hear coming from these images is hang on until the end. Remain faithful to Jesus in the midst of suffering. Now, does this mean that these images only apply to end of the age type events, ones that affect the entire nation or even the world? Perhaps not. Let me ask you a question. What end is most important to you? Some distant end of the age or your end? Yes, we watch Future's horizon with hope for the return of Jesus. But what about the end that each of us will face someday? The end that we know is coming. Your end and my end. For each of us, our end is the end of the age. For us. And our faithfulness in the face of our end matters in the same way. Therefore, these stories, these apocalyptic narratives and images speak to our end as well. At times in our lives, we may face a dreaded disease or illness, moments of great suffering or struggle. Therefore, these stories speak to us in the same terms. They remind us that there are those who have gone before us who endured tremendous hardships and did so with faith and hope. And their hope is ours. When we face our end, we too must turn to Jesus, place our faith and trust in Him, and look to a new kingdom, because true hope is only found in Him. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.